Good afternoon and welcome. Welcome back to those who are on vacation this week. And I'll say a special welcome to those who are online because you're still on vacation or you're at home recovering from your vacation. But while other people were on vacation, I was at work this week. I was thinking about vacations and it dawned on me vacations probably started at some point. That vacations as we know them haven't always existed. People didn't always do this. Like, when did they start? How did it start? And it was actually after the Civil War that wealthy upper class families started to vacate. They would go on retreats or something like that. But really it wasn't until after World War II in the 1950s that vacations took off, no pun intended. And from there, they've just kind of taken off. This idea of the family vacation has taken off. And I feel like it's snowballed and been growing exponentially since then, to the point where, guys, it's crazy now. My son, Simon, he's been to more countries and been on more airplanes in the first 18 months of his life than I went on in the first 18 years of my life. I feel like it keeps growing. I can't keep up with the new normal in vacations. And there's nothing wrong with that. But what I find a little bit ironic is that despite the uptick in the kind of complexity and intensity of our vacations, we aren't any less stressed out. In fact, we're more stressed out than we ever were before. There's a study from a couple of years ago, from 2022, that the APA put out, and they found that over 25% of Americans are too stressed out to function properly. That's how they defined it. Too stressed out to function. That's more than 25, that's 1 in 4. So look around, find 4 people, and one of them can't function right now because they're too stressed out by the world. And there's lots of things to be stressed out about these days, and things that maybe other parts of the world and other times were normal, but for us it's we haven't experienced this sort of instability and the uncertainty. There's political uncertainty, and there's economic uncertainty, and there's wars, and there's things, and there's fears, and we have a global mindset. There's just a lot to stress us out right now, and it doesn't seem like the vacations are doing the trick and trying to bring down the temperature. But we escape for just a moment because what we want is just to rest, right? We want to get a break. We want to have this sense of stability for a moment. And I think that there's so much of our lives, not just vacations, but there's so much of our lives that are actually organized around this desire to find rest. And I don't mean physical rest. I mean that existential sort of rest, this sense of a settled security that tomorrow's gonna be okay. And because we're different people and we have different predispositions and all of that, we go about it in different ways. For some of you, maybe you're more financially inclined, and so for you, rest and stability and security is gonna come through your finances. So as long as you have enough money in the bank, as long as you have the right money in your retirement, your portfolio is doing properly, and that you have an emergency fund, and you have your emergency fund for your emergency fund, as long as all that's in place, you can rest, you feel secure. But others of us who aren't as financially inclined, maybe it's something else. Maybe it's about your relationships and the status of those relationships. As long as you have the right people in your life and filling the right roles, then you feel secure. Right? If you have the right person that you're married to and they're doing everything they're supposed to, and you have the right boss and you have the right friends, then you feel like my ducks are in a row, I can rest. For others, maybe it's about autonomy, it's about freedom. As long as there's no strings kind of tied onto you, as long as you have this freedom that any moment you could pivot and you have that agility and freedom, then you feel like you're secure, you can rest. For others, maybe it's about control. That as long as you feel like you're behind the wheel of your life, you feel like you can handle anything. And so it's about anticipating all of the things that can happen and having contingency plans on top of contingency plans and trying to map out and always know what's going to happen here and there and just be prepared for it. And if you can have all of that in place, you can feel like you can rest. Maybe For others, it's not so much about you. Maybe it's about your kids, and you're thinking more about the next generation, that it doesn't matter how much you have. You want to ensure that your kids are going to be able to rest, and you can't rest until they rest. And so you want to make sure that you set them up for success, and they have every opportunity and every stability and structure in their life so that they can rest, because then you can rest. Or maybe for others, you've just fought that battle for so long unsuccessfully that you've just kind of given up. And so you've just gone over to apathy, that you're just like, maybe if I could just detach myself from these things, maybe if I could just learn not to care, and I can rest. We have all these different strategies and these different methodologies to create the right situation. If we can get the situation right, I can rest. But I don't think it's working. Because we're more stressed out than ever. We're more anxious than ever. We've gotten better at all of these things, right? We have more information and more tools and strategies for finances and relationships and control and all of that than we've ever had before, but we're more stressed out. We're more anxious. Instead of these things bringing a sense of rest and security into our lives, it seems like they're actually just bringing more worry. And I'm so grateful for the story of Ruth, because in the story of Ruth, we actually get a picture of two unlikely women finding rest. Not just pursuing it, but actually finding rest in an unexpected way. And I'm excited to be able to go through this story in chapter 3 of Ruth together. But just in case you haven't been with us for the last couple of weeks, you're not familiar with the story, I want to catch you up to speed. The story starts not with Ruth, but with her mother-in-law, Naomi. Naomi and her husband, Elimelech, they are Israelites, and they flee Israel because there's a famine in Israel. And so they go to an enemy territory. They go to Moab in pursuit of rest for them and their 2 sons. They want a life that's a little more secure. And so they go, they take off. It does not go well for them. Naomi's husband, Elimelech, dies, and then her 2 sons die. But not before those 2 sons marry 2 Moabite women. After all this happens, Naomi is ready to throw in the towel, and she's like, look, it's been a rough go. I'm gonna go back to Israel. Just you 2 ladies, go off your own way. And this is what she actually says to them. She says, may the Lord grant each of you rest in the house of a new husband. She says, you go find rest elsewhere. There's not going to be rest found here. And so the one daughter-in-law, Orpah, she takes Naomi up on the offer, and she goes out and tries to find rest elsewhere. But Ruth doesn't. And we don't know the backstory, we don't know why, but there's something that happened in Ruth's history and her experience with Naomi and her people and her God that Ruth says, I don't think so. I'm not going anywhere. For some reason, I'm pretty confident that if I'm gonna find rest, it's not gonna be apart from you and your people and your God. And so what Ruth does is she actually covenants with Naomi. She makes this binding promise. She says, wherever you go, I will go. And wherever you live, I will live. Your people will be my people. Your God will be my God. Ruth actually makes this formal covenant with Naomi, saying, not just with Naomi, but with Naomi and her people and her God, saying, I am with you. We're in this together. If I'm gonna find rest, it's gonna be with you and through you. So these 2 widows, they come back to Israel, and their life is falling apart. They're destitute. And as we looked at last week, Ruth goes out into the fields just to kind of glean the leftovers, try to find some bread to survive. And she's met with kindness from a man named Boaz. Boaz isn't just kind enough to let her glean, but he goes above and beyond. He's generous to her. And he gives Ruth and Naomi a gift that they hadn't had in a really long time. He gives them the gift of tomorrow. See, for so long, Ruth and Naomi, they've been so burdened by today that tomorrow, that was a luxury they didn't get to think about. Boaz comes in and he gives them grain, not for today and tomorrow, but for the year. And here's Naomi, and for the first time, she's looking past tomorrow, and she is not gonna throw away her shot. That's in the Bible. No, you got the Hamilton reference. So she has this gift of tomorrow. She's looking to the future. Naomi is thinking, well, I have this privilege of looking to tomorrow. And what does she do? She does what I think we would all do. She starts to look for rest. And so we're in Ruth chapter 3, verse 1. Ruth's mother-in-law, Naomi, said to her, "My daughter, shouldn't I find rest for you, so that you will be taken care of?" Now, what she means here is, shouldn't I find a husband for you who can provide for you and provide security and all of that? But the author is intentional not to say, hey, let me find a husband. He says rest because he's getting to the why behind it. The why behind the husband is rest. It's security for Ruth and her future and for Naomi herself. Saying, hey, let's go out and find this rest. It's the why behind so much of what we do, right? It's the why behind why you probably work the job that you work, in the career that you work in, is that you are trying to provide rest, security for yourself and for your family. It's the why behind our society's obsession with retirement, right? Because we're just like, well, maybe if I can work hard enough now, then I can secure for me rest down there. And if I can do that, then I can feel safe now. And it's the why behind why we work so hard and we go through so many headaches to get our kids into the right school, or we bend over backwards to keep them in the right school because, well, we want us and them to have that rest, that security. Perhaps like you, maybe the person you married them to secure rest. Don't worry, I'm not going to ask how that's going. But it's the why behind so much of what we do, that we want to provide this rest for us. And so this is what Naomi does. She says, hey, I'm going to provide rest for you and me together. We're going to do this. And as we look at their pursuit of rest, not just their pursuit, but their achievement, they actually find rest in this chapter in a really beautiful way. And as we look at their story of their successful pursuit of rest, there's a few things that we can learn about finding rest in God that we can kind of take away and I think bring into our lives. And the first one is this, that there is this persistent possibility of rest. Persistent possibility of rest. Because Ruth and Naomi, they believe that rest is still possible. And in order for them to pursue it, they have to believe that rest is possible. And that might sound obvious, but just think about what they've been through. If any two people could have said, rest might be for other people, not for me. God's kindness has run out on me. It could totally be Ruth and Naomi saying, no. My shot at rest is gone. But they believe that rest is persistently possible, and they put themselves out there. And so Naomi, she comes to Ruth and says, isn't Boaz our relative? All right, so this is the glimmer of hope that causes Naomi to believe that maybe God's kindness hasn't run out. Isn't Boaz our relative? Haven't you been working in his fields with his female servants? The fact that Boaz is their relative is really important to the story, and it will only make sense if you understand at least a little bit what levirate marriage is. Anybody hear of that term before? Levirate marriage. Awesome. So it was a practice in the ancient Near East where if a woman married a man and her husband died without giving her any children, then the brother of the dead man would marry that woman and hopefully give her children, but the children would technically be considered the children of the dead brother. Does that make sense? And so in this weird way, the brother would step in to redeem his brother's bloodline. And it sounds super crazy from our perspective, but back then it was actually a really, really merciful and kind structure in society to protect the vulnerable and give honor and dignity. And so there's this process called levirate marriage, and they realized that Boaz is a relative who could step in here. And there was a term for this brother who would step in. He was called the kinsman redeemer, or the family redeemer, because he was going to redeem what has been lost. And so when Naomi realized that it's Boaz who's out in the field, he was the guy who's so kind, and that he's a relative, that he could actually be the family redeemer, she says, wait a minute, maybe God's kindness has not run out for me yet. Despite everything I've been through, all of the things that have been taken away, the fact that I came back empty, God is not emptied of his kindness, not yet. She holds on to this hope. And then she tells Ruth to this evening, Boaz, will be winnowing barley on the threshing floor. So basically, this is how they would process the barley at the end of the harvest. She tells her, wash, put on perfumed oil, and wear your best clothes. She's like, all right, it's your turn, Ruth. Get dolled up, get dressed up, go down there. And it might just be about her kind of looking attractive to win the man, but it's actually probably more than that. So in ancient culture, as a widow, you would actually dress a certain way. You actually wouldn't bathe, you wouldn't put on oil. You would communicate to the world around you that you were a widow in mourning. And chances are Ruth and Naomi both were dressing and presenting themselves as widows in mourning. And when Naomi says, come and take a bath, get some perfume, wear your best clothes, she's not just saying, hey, doll yourself up. She's saying, it's time to get back out there. In a way, if you kind of think about it in like modern terms, you could imagine a widow or a widower after losing their spouse, they might continue to wear their wedding band for years, because they're not ready to process and move on yet. And that's totally fine. And Ruth was in that place, and Naomi's like, I think it's time to take off the wedding band, because I think there's hope that God has something more for us. And Ruth is willing to step in and embrace that same hope, that same persistent possibility that rest could be hers. And I don't know what your story is, but for some of you, maybe you're in that place right now where you feel like rest might be for somebody else, not for me. And maybe this is all you need to hear today. God's kindness has not run out. There's possible rest for you. Your story's not done. I don't care what's come before. Your story is not done, and his kindness has not run out. There's the possibility of rest for you. But it's a road that we need to walk down if we want to actually pursue this rest, and it's a narrow road to rest. This is the second thing we learned from this story. There's a narrow road that leads to rest. So Naomi starts barking out these orders at Ruth, go, get dressed up, go down. And then she tells her, go down to the threshing floor. But don't let the man know you're there until he's finished eating and drinking. There's like a big celebration at the end of the harvest. So this would have been like a big party. When he lies down, notice the place where he's lying down. Go in, uncover his feet and lie down, and then he'll explain to you what you should do. Naomi, that sounds scandalous. Are you sure this is a good idea? And it is a little bit scandalous in the way it's written, and it's definitely not just risque, it is risky for Ruth. It is risky, because if she's gonna go down there and put herself out there like this, that's a vulnerable place. Just to kind of put it in like a modern twist on it. It's like Boaz just closed a big deal with all his coworkers, and they were gonna go out and celebrate and have this nice big fancy dinner, and they were gonna drink some wine, and they were gonna eat some appetizers, and they were gonna drink some wine, and then they were gonna eat dinner, and then they were gonna drink some wine, and then they were gonna eat dessert, and then they were gonna drink some wine, and then they were gonna drink some wine. And so there's this big party, and then that night, instead of Boaz going home, he decides to crash in a hotel room for the night. And Naomi says, hey, Ruth, why don't you sneak into his hotel room, uncover his feet, and just lie down on the bed next to him? That is dangerous. And it can go wrong in a couple of ways. One, Boaz could be not a great guy, right? Like, we think he's a great guy because he did that really nice thing in the field. But like, let's be honest, people aren't always the same out in the field as they are in the hotel room late at night when no one's around. And he could totally take advantage of the situation, take advantage of Ruth, and he would get off scot-free. Nobody would care about the foreigner, the Moabite woman. What was she doing out in the threshing floor in the middle of the night? She brought this on herself. He could totally get away with it if he's not a great guy. On the other hand, if he is a good guy, if he is a stand-up guy, he could totally interpret everything that Ruth does as being not okay. Like, this is scandalous. And her making these advances, he could totally interpret that as her trying to solicit herself as a prostitute, which in that day and age could get her stoned. I mean, like pummeled with rocks, not like stoned, all right? Like her life is on the line here. If I was in Ruth's shoes, I'd have some questions. I'd hear this and be like, whoa, hold on, wait, step back a little bit. Middle of the night, let's do this in the daytime. Why am I alone with a man? And wait a second, I'm just supposed to let him tell me what to do? Give me some instruction. What if he asked me to do something I want to do? Like, I would have questions. And you know what Ruth's response is? I will do everything you say. She just submits to Naomi's instructions, which means submitting to Boaz. And if there is a word in our society that we reject, it is the word submission. And for good reason. You know, people take advantage of people all the time. And so we have a lot of stories in our minds to say, this is not a good idea to just submit to people. And submission in and of itself isn't a virtue. So there's nothing virtuous about being submissive, right? You can submit for the wrong reasons, you can submit to the wrong people, and it can be disastrous. The virtue isn't in submission, it's in faithfulness. Because what Ruth is submitting to here isn't just Naomi and to Boaz. She's submitting to the promise that she made to Naomi. She goes down to Boaz, she does everything Naomi says, meets him on the threshing floor in the middle of the night, uncovers his feet. He wakes up in the middle of the night, sees somebody's there, and he's like, who's there? And this is how Ruth responds. She says, I'm Ruth, your servant, she replied. Take me under your wing, for you are a family redeemer. Take me under your wing. Now, this is a euphemism for marriage in ancient Israel, and so what she's saying is, marry me. She's proposing marriage. But the author is really intentional by using this phrase, take me under your wing, because if you were here last week, anybody remember, when Boaz was blessing Ruth out in the field, he told Ruth that you're going to find refuge under God's wings. So here's Ruth in that moment saying, take me under your wing because I see you, Boaz, as an extension of God's wings. You're the extension of God's grace and kindness in my life because you're the family redeemer. You're the one whom God has chosen to protect me. And by coming to Boaz, instead of just marrying anybody, by coming to a family redeemer, she's not just submitting to Naomi and to Boaz, she's submitting to God's design, God's plan for redemption. And she's praised by Boaz for this. She says, then he said, Boaz, may the Lord bless you, my daughter, for you have shown more kindness now than before. More kindness. If you happen to have your Bible open and it's a physical Bible, underline, circle, highlight this word kindness, because in Hebrew it's the word hesed. And there's no English translation for this word. There's no direct word. And so here it's translated kindness. Sometimes it's translated mercy or compassion. Sometimes it's love. Sometimes it's covenant love or faithfulness or loyalty. It gets all of these different translations because it's all of those things combined. It is kindness, but not in the sense of random acts of kindness. It's a kindness that goes above and beyond, but in the context of like a covenant relationship. This faithfulness to the covenant. And so Ruth, by going to Boaz, by not going to any other man, she is being faithful to the covenant that she made to Naomi. Which is why Boaz in his response, he says, you could have pursued younger men who are rich or poor. You could have gone to men of standing who had money, just married them for their money. You could have married poor men just out of love. That would have been fine. It would have been permissible. She wouldn't have done anything wrong. There wasn't a law that she had to marry Boaz. But if she did marry somebody else, Naomi would have been left on her own. Ruth would have become that man's wife and would have joined his family, and Naomi would be abandoned, and her family line would just be done. And Ruth said, well, no, I made a covenant to Naomi, and I'm going to be faithful to Naomi and to her God, and I'm going to submit to that God's design. And so she chooses this pathway, the pathway of faithfulness, which is this narrow road that leads to rest. See, rest is found not through innocence, but through faithfulness. Here's what I mean, is I think a lot of times we as followers of Jesus, we ask the wrong question. We ask the question, is it okay for me to do this? We ask permission, right? We see the world in these two categories. There's the stuff out here that's wrong. I'm not gonna do that. But there's all this stuff in here that is permissible. This is the stuff that's acceptable. I could do this. And we say, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna live my life to the extent of what is permissible in search of rest. But Ruth says, no. I'm gonna follow a much narrower road tucked deep inside here. It's the road of faithfulness. She's not saying, hey, what can I get away with? She's saying, what is most faithful to the covenant that I made? As followers of Jesus, we are people of the new covenant. We're going to celebrate that in a little bit when we go to the table of communion, the new covenant in his blood. You're people of the covenant. That's what makes you a follower of Jesus, that he made a covenant to you and you made a covenant to him. You're in this marriage, this covenant relationship, just like the one that Naomi and Ruth had. And the question is your life and your pursuit of rest and the things that you give yourself to, is it motivated by the question of what is permissible or what is faithful to the covenant? It's a very different question, right? Would you spend your money the same way? Would you save your money the same way? Would you think about your money the same way if the question you're asking wasn't what is permissible and what is acceptable and what can I get away with and how can I live to the extent of this? Instead, if you ask, what is the most faithful thing I could do with my money? Or vacations, right? We were talking about vacations. Nothing wrong with vacations, but when you think about vacation, does it even dawn on you to ask the question, not what is permissible or affordable or accessible, but what is faithful in this moment? Think about the activities that you do, or maybe that you get your kids involved in, and the things that the way you organize your schedules in your life. Are you asking the question of what is permissible and normal and acceptable, or what is faithful to the covenant? Faithful to the covenant relationship that I have with God and he has with me. What about your job or your career, the thing that you do most of your time, most of your waking hours? Did you pick it based on what is permissible and accessible, possible, or what is faithful? Very different question. My mentor, Dan, he and his wife started the camp in Oswego that we send the fusion students to every summer as part of the mission trips. And when he was mentoring me, I remember him telling this story about when he was a teenager. Dan was one of 12 children. He was the youngest of 12. He has 9 children. So out there somewhere, there's like an army of Osteichs, because I think he has like 52 grandchildren. It's crazy. But there's a moment when he was a teenager, and one of his older brothers came to him and said, hey, Dan, what do you want to be when you grow up? And he said, I want to be an architect. And his brother said, why not a missionary? And the question stopped him in his tracks because he realized up until that moment, it hadn't even dawned on him to ask the question, what is the faithful path? He was just thinking, what's permissible? What can I do? And again, not wrong, right? This is permissible. This is okay. But this is the road to rest. And that one question changed the whole trajectory of his life. And he never became a missionary. But he did become a faithful follower of Jesus who every step of the way started asking the question, what is the faithful? What's the faithful choice? If I've met anybody who made this like a daily part of his life, he wakes up every day asking the question, every moment asking the question. He's asking it about every conversation. What if you were to ask about every conversation you have around the water cooler at work? It's not what is permissible to say. What's faithful? What's the faithful word in this moment? How much of our lives would be different if we made this decision not to do what is okay and permissible, but to be faithful to the covenant? See, this is the road to rest. The Apostle Paul, he captures this so well in 2 Corinthians. He says, for Christ's love compels us. His love, his agape, his faithfulness, his love, even more than hesed, compels us because we are convinced that one died for all and therefore all died. And he died for all, that those who live should no longer live for themselves, but for him who died for them and was raised again. He died for all, that those who live, that's you, should no longer live for themselves, should no longer live in the realm of the permissible, but for him who died for them and was raised again. There is no rest here. Not because God is going to punish you, not because he's mean or vindictive. There's no rest here because God, he loves you too much to let you just live your life here when there's this beautiful story that he wants to write right here. Beautiful story he wants to write in this narrow road of faithfulness. And he's inviting you into that. And he's not gonna let you rest out here because he loves you too much. He's like the parent who, and I'm sure none of you can imagine what this was like over the last week, the parent who watches their kid squandering their whole time on video games. Saying, get off the screen, get out there, there's something better for you. He's that God saying, no, yes, sure, it's okay, it's permissible, there's something so much better in this narrow road of faithful. And he's inviting you into that. Ruth decides not to do what's permissible, but to do what's faithful. And then everything magically works out for her at the end. Not quite. Not quite. It actually says that Boaz responds, he says, don't be afraid, my daughter. I will do for you whatever you say, which I love that. He like flips the script. He's like, actually, no, I'm gonna do for you. Since all the people in my town know that you're a woman of noble character, yes, it's true that I am a family redeemer, but there's a redeemer closer than I am. And I can just imagine Ruth's heart sinking into her stomach at this moment. She's like, oh, it was going so well. It was so close, I could taste it. And then this but comes in and just rips away the whole dream. But says, he's gonna look into it, but there's another guy who, if you wanna do this right, if you wanna take that narrow, faithful road, he has first dibs, basically, and so we gotta run it by him, and Ruth doesn't know him. He doesn't know what that life would be like or anything like that. And Boaz says, I can't take care of this right now. And so he's like, well, just sleep through the rest of the night. And then when he sends her home in the morning, he gives her a whole bunch of grain, just an exorbitant amount of grain. Just say, hey, I just want you to know I'm gonna work on this. It's like a deposit guaranteeing that he's gonna work on it. And she goes back to Naomi. And the situation isn't resolved, but I love this because it brings us to the third thing, which is the unexpected nature of rest. The unexpected nature of rest, because Ruth comes back, Naomi asks her how it goes. Ruth explains what happened, and look at what Naomi says. She says, my daughter, wait until you find out how things go. This is the last verse of this chapter, so this is how this chapter ends. Wait until you find out how things go. The story's not resolved yet. We don't know. And she says, wait, and this word wait here, it means to just sit. In fact, some translators say it's to relax. She's saying, oh no, sit tight, relax. It's okay. You just wait until you find out how it turns out. And I could just imagine Ruth being like, how could I relax? Nothing's changed. I'm still not married. I don't know how this thing is going to be resolved. How can I relax? And look at what Naomi says. She says, you can relax now. Why? Because he won't rest until he resolves this. Naomi's answer is so good. Her answer is so good. She says, you can rest because your Redeemer will not rest until he fixes the situation. See, we tend to think of rest as the situation being resolved, then I can rest. We think of it as being situational. And Naomi says, no, it's relational. The situation, you guys know this, you might be stressed out about a situation in your life and it might get resolved today and be totally destroyed tomorrow, or there could be another situation tomorrow, or our lives are going to be filled with situations that are out of our control. She says, but don't worry, the situation being resolved, that's not where you get to relax. It's knowing that your Redeemer will not rest till he makes it right for you. He will not rest. For Boaz, he was Ruth's Redeemer, and we'll learn next week. The next page, it just says that he goes out to the city gate to kind of deal with this, and he meets before a council, and they talk it through, and he's able to get the whole matter settled and redeem Ruth, which is pretty cool. You know what your Redeemer did? You know what he did? He took on flesh and he wandered the earth with no place to lay his head until at the end of his life, they dragged him outside the city gate. And that tribunal, that council, falsely accused him and crucified him there. Because he won't rest till he makes it right for you. He will not rest. Boaz gave Ruth some grain as a deposit, guaranteeing that he was going to fix the situation. You know what your Redeemer gave you? He gave you his Spirit, his Holy Spirit living in you now, promising you that you can rest because he will be restless until the moment he makes it right. You guys know you have a Redeemer who won't rest. And you can rest now. Your rest doesn't have to be confined to the resolution. It can actually break the barriers of the resolution, come back in time and meet you where you are right now. You can find rest now knowing that your Redeemer will not rest for you. Because he made a covenant with you. And he is faithful to his covenant. When we come to the table of communion, if you have those elements, you want to pull them out now. We're remembering this moment where Jesus, he established a new covenant, he called it. It's like a new marriage bond where he made this vow to you, much like Ruth made to Naomi, where you go, I'm going to go. If you live, I'm going to live. If you die, I'm going to die for you. And he sealed that covenant in his body and in his blood. I just want to take a moment now as we take these elements together to be reminded of this new covenant relationship that you have with this Redeemer who will not rest until he makes it right. He took the bread and he blessed it and he gave thanks for it. He said, "Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe." Brings forth the true bread, comes from heaven. Take, and eat. After supper, he took the cup, and he was so excited to be able to offer this to his disciples. This wasn't just any cup. This is the cup of a new covenant. This new promise, this new relationship marked by his unending faithfulness. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, creator of the fruit of the vine. This cup is the new covenant. Christ's blood poured out for your sins, my sins, and the sins of the whole world. Drink of this, all of you. Your Redeemer won't rest until he makes it right. The question for you is, are you going to walk that narrow road of faithfulness? Are you going to live in the realm of permissible? The band is going to lead us in a song, and I want to encourage you to take a few minutes, and as they're playing and singing, just take a moment to do some business with God and to maybe just examine some areas. Maybe there's a particular place in your life where you're feeling particularly restless, and maybe that's exactly the place where God is saying, you're restless here because you're not surrendering this to me. You're trying to do what's permissible, and I have a better story for this. I have a story of faithfulness. Take some time to see if there's anything God is putting on your heart to today, surrender to him and to say, God, I don't want to live in the permissible. I want to live in the faithful. And I encourage you, as the song's playing, whenever you feel ready, to just stand. To stand and take a stand, to say, I'm going to do what I can to walk that narrow road of faithfulness.